Death Stranding is one of the most divisive games we've seen in recent times, and at the time of release back in 2019, Death Stranding was met with similar polarising reviews.
It's clear that it's Kojima who's the one who's taking the piss.
And it is honestly one of the best I've ever played.
It is a complete and utter embarrassment.
I do think this game is one hell of an achievement in its own right.
It's a boring pile of shit.
Now, this isn't really a review of the reviewers because I've got respect for each one you just heard there, but with the franchise of Death Stranding effectively getting its fourth chance in the market's limelight after the original PS4 release, then being ported over to PC, then the director's cut, and now that Death Stranding 2 has been confirmed, I'm still so curious as to why this game is so divisive. It's pretty clear that some people think Death Stranding was creator Hideo Kojima continuing his legacy of being an outrageously artistic gaming visionary, but others think Death Stranding was a step too far towards utter lunacy. There are, however, certain people's opinions that mean absolutely nothing to me. The tunnel vision type, the black and white deciders who will never be swayed. I respect their choice, but I don't respect their opinions, and there is a subtle difference. These are the types of people that have already decided on a product before they've even tried it. A painting is sometimes already a masterpiece before we even glance at it, purely because we know who painted it. Sometimes an artist could genuinely paint an absolute shit show, and of course there'll be critics out there waxing lyrical about the emotionally provocative explosions of colour, and the piece just speaks to their soul. But to me, the painting that's on your screen right now is absolute crap, and it needs recycling, so an actually talented artist could make better use of that waste of paper. Well, that's what I told my son anyway when he showed it to me. This simplistic mentality that something is already good because of the clothes label, the artist, the chef, or in this case, the games developer, is so shockingly flawed that it brings into question the legitimacy and credibility of any so-called critic. Only they themselves will know whether their opinion is truthful to themselves and to their viewers, so it's almost impossible to level the accusation of fanboy towards anybody, and the announcement of Death Stranding 2 will no doubt have these same type of critics already celebrating this announcement with sheer joy, and the other side of the argument is that others are already planning their assault on Hideo Kojima.
This station does not endorse vigilante justice, unless it gets results, which it will.
Just to be clear, so you know which side of the fence I'm on, I'm a huge fan of Death Stranding, and I've been a big fan of Kojima's past work too, but I'm not afraid to call a shit, just ask my son. But once I'd unravelled the borderline insane concept that's embedded deep within Death Stranding, trying to fathom what the actual fuck is going on inside Hideo Kojima's head, there was this light bulb moment where it all just sank in, absorbing all of these outlandish concepts, and I sat back in my chair in pure admiration and had this urge to tell Mr. Kojima
that, my friend, is some damn fine, genuine, outside-the-box thinking.
We all have favourite things in life, but most of us are in a privileged enough position to try something different once in a while. We've all probably got some DVDs and games nicely stacked on a shelving unit in your home somewhere, and at some point you've probably just sat there and stared at them, knowing you want to watch or play something, but which one? You inevitably narrow it down to a few favourites in the hope of scratching that itch, wanting something but not knowing exactly what it is you want. But what about those classics that haven't made the cut for this very moment of choosing? To put it simply, you just don't feel like watching that movie or playing that game. It's not a bad game, you just don't feel like playing that particular game right now. That's totally fine. This feeling usually stems from craving something new, something different, and the release of Death Stranding was the perfect answer for those moments when the industry itself is craving something out of the ordinary, something that hasn't conformed to the mindless conveyor belt, mass-produced same old, same old. I'll often fall into that loop of mundanity myself because, in fairness, a lot of the rinse and repeat genres out there are genuinely fun to play, but there will always come a time when even the longest lasting trend of gaming that is seemingly destined to live on forever will live its last day, and the masses will eventually want something new, and that is why developers and creators creators like Hideo Kojima should always be encouraged. Pioneers of industry, visionaries, trendsetters. I fully understand why Death Stranding was rejected by a huge amount of people, because the masses haven't finished enjoying what their genetically programmed brains have decided that they enjoy. There's nothing wrong with that. It could possibly take a game like Death Stranding 10 years before some people decide to at least recognize what Hideo Kojima was attempting in developing this game. Nobody knew what to expect. We've never seen a so-called Strand game before. Having said that, Hideo Kojima didn't exactly do himself any favors though by deciding to attack the gamers who didn't either understand or simply just didn't enjoy his product, stating, "Maybe this is a game that is difficult to understand for a certain type of critic or audience. Americans are big fans of first-person shooters and Death Stranding is not. It is flying higher." Oh, for God's sake, Mr. Kojima, that's not doing you any favors whatsoever. And I even think the Kojima fanboys will have read that and been like, there's no two ways about it. The man has unquestionably large testicles to even attempt what he's attempted with Death Stranding, and in my opinion he's pulled it off. Einstein once said that the person who follows the crowd will usually go no further than the crowd. The person who walked alone is likely to find himself in places no one has even seen before. That's an approach to life that Kojima has obviously taken on board, but as much as I love the guy, you've got to be careful not to alienate people, because there's a fine line between confidence and arrogance. The funniest thing I saw on its release was this massive uprising and huge outcry was heard from actual delivery men. FedEx and UPS delivery drivers across the globe felt betrayed because Death Stranding was simplified down to being a postman simulator. The same goes for anyone whose occupation would carry over into their spare time. An antique dealer probably has a house full of antiques. Do game developers not play their own games or play games at all? Why do football players jump on a stream after a training session to play FIFA? I mean, why stop there? What about the concept of a hat salesman? Wearing a hat must be absolutely mind-blowing to these people.
When you're outside the workplace, do you wear hats, or does that just kind of make you feel like you're always in the office?
It really is a ridiculous argument to simplify Death Stranding so drastically, and especially without even playing it. I'm sure you've already noticed that I'm a big fan of Death Stranding, but that's not to say it's not got its flaws. The combat side of the game is far and away the weakest aspect of the game. CQC is a term that I learned from my time playing Metal Gear Solid back in the day, which is close quarters combat for those who aren't already aware, and in Death Stranding, the CQC is pretty poor. You can wipe out an entire camp of enemies by simply moving quickly and mashing the punch button at times. Stealth is another viable tactic of approach, but sadly it's another boring one. The simple, slow and crouched approach from behind before strapping them up with your strand rope is half of the stealth mechanics basically, and the other half is hiding in the bushes so long as you've not stacked too much cargo on Sam's back. For me, this felt like the weakest aspect of Death Stranding, and for Kojima to have included a reasonable amount of this in the game, I'm still surprised at how poorly refined the CQC and the stealth elements were. This is probably where my negativity ends though, and sticking with the combat side of things, the weapons are genuinely satisfying to use, especially the bowler gun, which is incredibly gratifying to see that cable eject and wrap itself around an enemy's neck, sometimes knocking them unconscious or at least temporarily restraining them, meaning Sam has to plant his big black boots on the back of their heads to knock them clean out. But that's only dealing with the human enemies of the game. There's these haunting, otherworldly, floating, ghost-like beings called BTs that only Sam can see. Sam's given anti-BT guns, with the bullets for these guns needing to be loaded with your own blood. The reason why is explained in the story, and the in-game problems arise thanks to your blood also being your health bar, so you have to be cautious with your ammo, and as you can imagine, this presents a small dilemma for Sam.
Your body only has a certain amount.
This is just another example of an amazingly unique concept born from Kojima's mind, and these are just a few of the weapons that are at our disposal. Eventually, we'll unlock more permanently neutralizing solutions, and my favorite is the sticky gun, which is basically Spider-Man in a gun, giving some creative variety to the ways that Sam can retrieve his parcels. The character design is visually impressive and hugely diverse, with so much creativity naivety being poured into their designs, from Die Hardman's black skull mask, Higgs's all-black attire with a golden mask, Fragile slightly sexual spiky shoulders with her fancy-arse umbrella that looks about as useful as a marzipan dildo, and of course Sam the man himself carrying his infamous BB and his handy little robotic BT detecting arm peering over his shoulder. They all look incredible. From a performance point of view, Troy Baker, who plays Higgs, is often considered the best of the best for gaming character performances, but he didn't really hit the heights compared to some of his past performances, such as the Joker in the Batman series, for example. But as for Mads Mikkelsen, he stole the show with his initially up-close and personal performance as Clifford Unger before we eventually witness him evolve into something that's disturbing, to say the least. Oh, and you can't forget the star of the show, the real star of the show, Conan O'Brien, who reels off some absolutely gut-bustingly hilarious otter jokes and even treats Sam with a fabulous otter hat. Having already felt the urge to speak to Mr. Kojima earlier, I had to get in touch with him regarding this and ask why he chose to include this masterstroke combination of otters and Conan O'Brien. I mean, this must have cost you a few quid, Mr. Kojima.
Far and away the most expensive shot of the movie, but it was integral to the story.
The game is set in an apocalyptic USA where a catastrophic event known as the Death Stranding has given these otherworldly things known as beached things, aka BTs, access to our world. These invisible beings have escaped into our world from the beach. In a nutshell, a beach is almost like a pit stop area to the afterlife that's considered to be unique to each person. Now, without spoiling too much more about the story, Sam has this special ability called Dooms, giving him a rare ability to see and avoid these BTs, which have caused explosions known as void outs whenever they consume the dead by necrosis. This then produces rain known as timefall that rapidly ages and deteriorates whatever it touches. This has eventually led the remaining population to confine themselves to remote outposts known as knot cities, and while Sam works for the logistic company Bridges, it's up to Sam to reconnect these knots while uncovering mystery after mystery, learning more and more about the Death Stranding as he progresses. We're immediately shown the byproduct of this new world, being introduced to this chubby little floating bug thing called cryobites that are to be eaten for a reason I'm deciding not to spoil, but watching the character Fragile peer pressure Sam into eating these fugly little things was a little bit unsettling.
Good, huh?
Oh, good.
So yeah, it's a mind-boggling story that has created such a unique world that evokes so much wonder and curiosity. You can almost sense Kojima's desire to implement a movie into the gaming world, but I'm all for this and I think the two can be combined if done properly. The emotion at times is gut-wrenching. I'm trying to avoid spoilers as best as I can, but there's many delivery orders throughout that have an emotional human tag associated with them, and one in particular towards the end of the game that involved Sam's bridge baby, the BB that he carries on his chest. My son was barely 1 year old when I first played Death Stranding, and any parent who plays that particular moment would find it near fucking impossible not to feel like they've been booted in the stomach. It's a moment that I will never forget. The choice of music too, it played such a huge role in the emotion that it sapped from me, and not just in that moment either. The soundtrack is mostly filled by a band called Low Roar, as well as a few other quality tracks. I've actually got a few of their tracks downloaded and I enjoy listening to them on long drives, remembering certain moments throughout Death Stranding. It's that good. It lives long in the memory after playing, and there's even certain moments when huge, sprawling landscapes expose themselves to Sam, providing a view that is nothing short of jaw-dropping. Unbelievably though, Kojima actually heard a song by Low Roar while shopping in Iceland. No, the country Iceland, not the phenomenal supermarket chain that provides delicious frozen goods. I've mentioned already that the gameplay can be simplified down to request fetching, parcel delivery, walking simulator, or whatever you want to call it, and I can even understand those accusations from gamers who crave more action from their games. The inventory management as well, this is a huge factor throughout Death Stranding, and again this is something that can be an immediate turn off for some players, especially if it's been implemented poorly. Nobody wants to be torn between what items to take take with you, what to leave behind, and constantly being forced to decide. But I thought Death Stranding not only made the menu UI a pretty seamless experience at the main terminals, but it's also incredibly generous in what you can carry, building a skyscraper of boxes on your back and testing out your vehicle's suspension with a shed load of heavy goods. Only when I was forced to carry another human being during certain quests did I feel a little bit limited in what I could carry, and it's pretty remarkable that nobody in Bridge's health and safety department has highlighted the potential of sustaining long-term spinal damage by carrying other human beings using this ridiculous maneuver. For me, it's the slog of the journey, from picking up the parcel's instructions to delivering it to its destination. It was such an awe-inspiring trek across one of the most visually impressive backdrops I've ever played in a game. It's one of those games where I rarely just looked ahead. The stunning environment demanded my attention no matter which way I was heading, and again, this can just be simplified down to, ooh, it's just a load of mountains and rocks, but those mountains and rocks are the journey. Sam's robotic arm detects differences in the terrain through a colour-coded system, with red obviously highlighting the best chance of Sam losing his footing. I loved navigating this world, looking 3 or 4 steps ahead, looking for a shallow area in a river to wade through or a little gap in a wall of rock to slip through. Early on, abiding by the rules of the terrain is imperative in making it from A to B. Still focusing on the polarising nature of Death Stranding though, I can understand why this might put some people off. Players like to do what they're not meant to do, climbing up the impossible cliff faces of Skyrim with a nice combo of side-to-side movements and beating the crap out of the jump button just to take that shortcut over the mountain rather than just, walk around it. When we're obviously spending 3 times longer mashing the jump button than it would have been for me to have just walked around the bloody thing. I think the same logic is wanted by gamers in Death Stranding, and there's a case to be made that you can do the equivalent of a Skyrim jump button mashing, taking the vehicles around all sorts of impossibly bad terrain. Some of the terrain should have players not even contemplating the idea of showing the rubber face of one of your tyres to that treacherous sea of rock, but they do, and that's just because they're idiots. And being one of those idiots myself, I gave 0 shits about Sam's poor testicles getting absolutely battered to bits against the seat of his bike when aggressively smashing my way through these disgustingly jagged and bumpy surfaces. To some, that's just part of the fun, and it's almost a freedom to play the game how it's meant to be played, or you're just simply cramming in as many square pegs in round holes as possible. But if you choose to play the game this way and then start complaining that the game is clunky, well, that just makes no sense whatsoever. As for Norman Reedus though, he portrays a brilliant sense of loneliness throughout, and you will play the game alone, but connecting people is at the forefront of Kojima's thinking, and if there's a stereotypical moral to the story, that would be it. Even though Sam ventures the world alone, there's a constant presence of other players that you'll never actually see. The wide variety of tools and structures that are available in the game can all be left behind and constructed by other players that are randomly generated in your game for you to use if needed or wanted. You've got to make sure the battery in your vehicle is fully charged for each journey, and this is critical, and searching for some well-placed generators can be a lifesaver, or, a parcel saver at the very least. Poor planning can result in some infuriating moments when you're so close, yet so far.
How to juice.
But you can't just simply blame the game for your poor planning, but you can blame the game because you've got to plan in the first place though. But again, that's just another example of what gamers might want from their games, and this being a huge division of opinions. Each tool or structure that you or someone else has left behind can be liked by other players, which I guess would increase the chances of it appearing in other players' games, and we're notified when our tools and structures are being used by other players. This feeds the brain's dopamine cravings, providing that warm and gratifying validation from other players approving my well-placed equipment. The structures start off as roads and eventually lead to electric ziplining your way across snowy mountaintops, and reshaping the world has such a huge role to play in the game. Like I've said though, you can skip over big parts of this side of the game by Skyrim button bashing your way through parts, but these structures once built are so satisfying to know that yours and the other players' graft have shaped the world this way, and it just makes it that much simpler to get to your your destination now. I'm predominantly a solo player myself though, and I was initially concerned about other players interfering with my world, but there was only the odd occasion where a major structure like a road that had been built for me, and at times it actually felt like a welcome surprise. It's a fantastic balance of feeling the presence of other players' interaction with the open world, but never negating my use entirely, leaving me with a good sense of worth, allowing me to be the player who, more often than not, put those finishing touches on the structure and finally seeing them through to their completion. These structures are built with a variety of materials that can be found out in the world or claimed at the various outposts, but be careful not to rinse them dry just for these structures, because these materials are used to construct vehicles, weapons and other helpful gadgets to help Sam on his way. I know there are plenty of antisocial gamers out there like me who often want experiences just for themselves, but the intrusion of other players is kept to such a pleasant minimum, while Kojima is cleverly reminding players that no man is an island. I was brought up to believe that if you want something doing right, you do it yourself, but over the years I've learned that's not always true, because we all need help from time to time, and I think that's another one of the many messages that Kojima is pushing through Death Stranding. The world is littered with various parcels left intentionally, accidentally by other players, and even other porters. Now the porters are the NPC carriers of cargo, and you can stumble across these guys and interact with them. These are the good guys, but there are porters out there who eventually lose their minds though, and they've become engulfed with an addiction to hoarding cargo, and those are the first human enemies that Sam will come across. They aren't out to hurt you, but they just want your cargo. Now if I was living in this world, I defo would be one of these guys, because it's such an inexplicably addictive process to schlep cargo across this world, and if you're like me and you can't resist wandering off the beaten path looking for collectibles, or simply just wanting to wipe the map clean, then you'll be right in your element here, echoing the words of the great Gandalf himself: not all who wander are lost. That's pretty deep stuff right there. Anyway, the footage you've seen has been captured at a mixture of 4K on a 3090 PC and 1440p on a 3070 laptop, both using a 12th gen i9, both at the highest settings, and both rarely dropping below 70 FPS when using quality DLSS. It runs really well, and it's been such a good port from PS4. I'm so hyped to see what controversial and polarising content Kojima is going to include in Death Stranding 2, with the original being far from perfect, providing a little room for improvement, but it was more than a big enough hit to get a sequel out into the wild. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Death Stranding though, and the upcoming sequel especially, and I will see you in the next one.